Have you ever looked at your life and wondered, how did I get here? Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, tired moment of reflection, like you're standing in the middle of your own story, but the chapters don't feel like they belong to you anymore? I've been there, where everything felt too heavy, too uncertain, and too far from the version of life I once imagined. And in that space, I knew deep down something had to change, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. The idea of starting over terrified me, but staying stuck scared me more. Starting over doesn't mean you failed. It means you're brave enough to begin again. But let's be honest, the moment you decide to turn the page is rarely filled with confidence or clarity. It's usually full of questions, fear, and that aching doubt that whispers, what if this doesn't work either? Still, there's something sacred about admitting to yourself that you deserve more, even when you're unsure what that more is. And sometimes, it's in the uncertainty that we begin to find our truest direction. When I realized I needed to start over, I didn't announce it to anyone. There were no big declarations, no social media posts, no clear plans written down. It was just a quiet decision I made in my heart, one I revisited every day. When fear tried to talk me out of it, I told myself, it's okay to not have it all figured out, but it's not okay to keep living in what's breaking you. That one sentence became my anchor when everything else felt too shaky to hold on to. The first step wasn't dramatic. It was as simple as breathing and telling myself I could try. Not try perfectly, not try confidently, but just try. Scared and all. And that's the thing no one tells you. Starting over isn't always about action. Sometimes it's just about permission. Permission to feel what you feel, to want what you want, and to begin again without guilt. Because the moment you give yourself that permission, something in you begins to unlock. I used to think starting over meant going backward, like losing time, progress, or value. But now I see it as a deeper kind of wisdom, one that says, this isn't working, and I'm brave enough to change it. It's hard to admit when the thing you fought for no longer fits you, whether it's a job, a relationship, or a version of yourself. But honoring that truth is one of the most powerful things you can do. And choosing your peace over your pride, that's growth. When I finally started over, everything didn't magically get better. In fact, for a while, things felt messier. Unfamiliar, unsteady, and awkward. I questioned myself more times than I can count, and battled the urge to go back to what was comfortable. But comfortable doesn't always mean healthy. And I had to learn the difference the hard way. Every day I kept choosing what felt true, instead of what felt familiar. Fear showed up often. It tried to convince me I was making a mistake. It whispered lies like, you should have stayed, or you're not strong enough for this. And sometimes I believed it, just long enough to feel paralyzed. But deep down, even when fear was loud, something quieter kept speaking. Keep going. And sometimes that whisper was all I needed. Take one more step. Starting over required me to let go of timelines. I had to release the idea that things had to happen by a certain age or stage. And that's not easy in a world that measures progress in milestones and success and speed. But I learned that slow progress is still progress. And sometimes the slower path is the more sustainable one. So I gave myself the grace to go at my own pace. There were days I wanted to give up on the idea of starting over entirely. Days where I missed the old life, even if it wasn't good for me. Because comfort has a way of blurring the truth, making you forget why you left in the first place. But then I'd remember the pain I carried in silence, and how I promised myself I wouldn't settle anymore. That reminder kept me grounded in the hard moments of rebuilding. Rebuilding your life takes more than motivation. It takes daily, quiet courage. The kind of courage that doesn't come with applause or validation. The kind that wakes up, tired and unsure, and says, let's try again. It's the kind of courage that holds space for doubt, but chooses movement anyway. And every small act of showing up becomes its own kind of victory. There's a unique kind kind of grief that comes with starting over, not just for what you're leaving behind, but for who you used to be. I had to say goodbye to a version of myself that worked so hard to survive, even when things were hard. And that version of me deserved to be honored, not resented. She fought for me in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. But now it was time to become someone new. Someone who didn't just survive, but truly lived. I've learned that fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes fear is just a sign that you're standing at the edge of something meaningful. The scarier the step, the more potential it holds. I had to teach myself not to run from that fear, but to listen to what it was telling me. Often it was just asking me to slow down and be gentle, not to give up. I used to think that courage showed up with loud confidence, but more often it came to me in a whisper, a soft voice saying, "You're allowed to try again. You're allowed to rebuild, even if no one claps for you this time." Starting over has taught me that bravery isn't loud or glamorous. Sometimes it looks like packing up your heart and moving forward quietly. And there's beauty in that kind of quiet strength. There were moments I felt completely alone in the decision to begin again, like I was walking into a fog, while the rest of the world kept moving forward in clarity. But I reminded myself, no one can fully understand your path, because no one else is living your exact story. And that's okay. You're allowed to be misunderstood, while honoring what's right for your healing. One thing I've come to accept is that starting over doesn't always come with applause. People might not understand why you left, or why you're rebuilding something they thought looked fine. But you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. You owe it to yourself, to build a life that feels like home inside your own skin. And sometimes that means disappointing others. To stay true to you. Sometimes the scariest part of starting over is not the unknown, but the fear of failing again. I've failed before. I've made choices that didn't work, trusted people who didn't stay, built dreams that didn't last. And yet, here I am, still willing to believe again. That's not weakness, that's resilience. It took me time to understand that healing and beginning again are not separate things. Starting over is often where healing begins. You leave the places that broke you, and in doing so, you make space for something new to grow. But you must allow yourself time to rest, to reflect, to rebuild slowly and intentionally. And in that space, you discover who you are now. I've learned not to rush the process. I used to think I had to get it all right on the first try, to build quickly, to prove I made the right decision. But now I see that the most meaningful things in life aren't rushed. They tended to with patience, grace, and with deep intention. And starting over is no different. The truth is, we outgrow things, places, people, even versions of ourselves. It doesn't mean those things look bad. It just means we're evolving. I started to ask myself a different question. Not, what if I fail again? But what if I thrive? What if this next chapter holds more joy than I've ever known? What if everything I thought I lost is simply being reshaped into something better? That shift in perspective gave me hope. And sometimes, hope is the first seed of change. Starting over doesn't mean you failed. It means you've been brave enough to admit something isn't working. It means you've chosen truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, and peace over pleasing others. When I began again, I had to learn how to be a beginner. Be okay with not knowing everything, to stumble, to learn out loud. That was humbling, but it was also freeing, because I didn't have to perform anymore. I could be honest about what I needed, what I didn't know, and what I was still healing from. And in that honesty, I found real connection, both with others and with myself. Not every day has been full of courage. Some days have been full of tears, of doubt, of questioning whether I made the right choice. But even on those days, I kept choosing myself. I kept choosing to believe that peace was worth the discomfort. I kept choosing to trust that the small steps were still steps forward. And every time I did, I grew a little bit more. I've come to understand that fear is part of any new beginning. Not because we're not ready, but because we're human. Fear wants to keep us safe, and that's okay. But we can't acknowledge our fear without letting it make the decisions. We can hold it gently. Say thank you for trying to protect me, and then still choose growth. That's the kind of self-compassion that turns fear into fuel. There's a beauty in starting over that no one really talks about. The blank page, the wide open possibilities, the quiet invitation to dream again. It's scary, yes, but it's also sacred. Because in those early uncertain moments, you're rebuilding not just your life, you're rebuilding your identity. You're rewriting your story with more truth, more tenderness, and more courage than ever before. And that, in itself, is a victory. Starting over forced me to slow down and ask myself deeper questions. Questions I had avoided for years. What do I truly want? What kind of life feels aligned with my values? Who do I want to become? Not just what do I want to achieve? And how can I create that without betraying myself again? I used to be afraid that starting over meant losing time. But I've realized it actually saves time. Because staying in the wrong place with the wrong people, or in the wrong version of yourself, costs you far more in the long run. Every honest beginning gets you closer to who you are meant to be. And even though it may not feel like it now, you're not going backward. You're being redirected. And redirection is one of life's most loving gifts. One thing I've learned is this. You are allowed to outgrow your old life without having all the answers for your new one. You're allowed to start walking before you know exactly where the path leads. Clarity often comes after the first few steps, not before. So give yourself permission to begin, even if it's messy and unsure, because the most beautiful stories often start with uncertainty. I know what it's like to long for permission, for someone to tell you it's okay to walk away, to reset, to choose differently. So if you're waiting for a sign, let this be it. You're not selfish for wanting peace. You're not broken for needing a new beginning. And you're absolutely allowed to start over, even if your voice shakes. Sometimes starting over looks like doing one small thing differently, like waking up 10 minutes earlier to sit in silence, or finally saying no to something that drains you. It doesn't have to be dramatic or public to be powerful. When I started over, I noticed how many old beliefs I had to let go of. Ideas about success, perfection, timelines, and where I thought I had to be to be loved. I had to unlearn the idea that healing had a deadline, or that growth had to be free. I began to honor progress I couldn't always measure, like softer thoughts, gentler mornings, and the ability to rest without guilt. That kind of growth isn't glamorous, but it's deeply sacred, and it's the kind that truly lasts. Your healing doesn't need to be understood to be valid. The only one who needs to know the why behind your new beginning is you. And if it brings you peace, that's reason enough. Not everyone will walk with you into your new beginning, and that's okay. Some people were only meant for certain chapters, not the whole story. When you start over, don't rush to rebuild everything at once. Let it come slowly, naturally, with care. Give yourself permission to move at a pace that honors your energy and respects your story. This is not a race. It's a return to yourself. You might cry some days. You might laugh unexpectedly. You might feel like you're floating between who you were and who you're becoming. But don't stop, because this middle space, as messy as it is where the real transformation happens. So if today is the day you choose to begin again, even with shaky hands and an uncertain heart, know this: you're doing something incredibly brave. Not everyone has the courage to start over, but you do, and that courage will carry you further than fear ever could. Until next time, take a deep breath and start slow. You don't have to be ready, you just have to be willing.